So now that we're witnessing the topple of Syria, that now Israel is coming in, storming, taking land, and installing an actual terrorist, not kidding, not even a hyperbole, they've installed a former Al Qaeda member, an actual terrorist, to now lead that country away from Bashar al Assad, who was providing healthcare and free education to Syrian people, who overwhelmingly supported. But we had infiltrators, we had players within the United States, within Israel, within Russia, all these different countries backing into this regime change war, this civil war, which wasn't even civil war to begin with. It was outside actors posing as civilians to drastically decimate on Syrian territory, destroy their homeland, destroy any capabilities of survival in the nation, to install this terrorist to become the leader so we can extract their resources. And now is further escalated more, folks, because Israel is not backing down. Israel is not, focusing. It's basically no longer about Hamas or October 7th at this point, because as Globe Eye News points out, Israel is now preparing for potential strikes against Iran nuclear facilities. Because apparently, Hamas is a part of them. They were involved in October 7th. Somehow hostages are in that area. Oh, no. It has nothing to do with that. It's the fact that this is part of the greater Israel project, just like why they advanced into Syria, why they're taking this land, is to further embellish their geopolitical goals into invading these countries, taking over their resources, and advancing their state, advancing their colonization. Or as RFK Jr. would say, it's an aircraft carrier. It's an aircraft carrier for the state, and we can't lose that because otherwise Russia or China may take those resources. I don't want Russians to have the opium. I mean, he didn't actually say that, the Russian opium thing, but you get the intention. That's what Lindsey Graham said about Ukraine. Hey, we got to get in there and storm into Ukraine because we don't want them to touch the minerals. We don't want those guys to touch the minerals. So here is Jeffrey Sachs, who is I find him to be the words of wisdom guy, because this guy knows exactly the fundamental structure of why this is happening. I've listened to him on many shows and many podcasts explain this in detail. And here he is about to explain why Israel, why the Syrian overthrowing, and why these players, why, ISIS and Al-Qaeda and Al-Nusra and all these terrorist organizations are in coordinates with our government to advance this warfare to take down sovereign nations and exploit their resources, exploit their people. So listen to this.
War in Syria. And you may actually hear from grown-up reporters who are lying through their teeth or ignorant beyond imagining that, the war in Syria, yes, Russia intervened in Syria. Well, do you know that that Obama tasked the CIA to overthrow the Syrian government, starting 4 years before Russia intervened? What kind of nonsense is that? And how many times did the New York Times report on Operation Timber Sycamore, which was the presidential order to the CIA to overthrow Bashar al-Assad? 3 times in 10 years. This is not democracy. This is a game. And it's a game of...
So he mentioned about Timber Sycamore, that was the CIA operation. That was our measure to do a coup on the Syrian government to throw off Bashar al-Assad. And we tried that. We tried to overthrow their government. It didn't work out. The Syrian people resisted because they favor Bashar al-Assad. And again, I'm not putting favoritism on him, because I know people like to spin that around and say, well, if you're supportive of him, that must mean you're a Assad puppet or you're a Putin apologist. They try to do that purposely to undermine and go towards this hideous war agenda. And it's not helping anybody. It's not advancing anything other than the notions of the CIA and the Pentagon and the military-industrial complex, which were warned about in the 1960s by Dwight D. Eisenhower, that this was going to happen, that they're going to cultivate false flag attacks, They're going to cultivate these, these scenarios to advance warfare, to advance illegitimate warfare that decimates a population, takes their resources, and nobody's going to feel safe. No safety measures are taking place of this. And it is not about humanitarianism. It is not about saving the people, as people like CNN would like to report. CNN, who notoriously falsify their own stories. They had the woman on there that was sniffing the backpack after the chemical attack, because that's apparently what you're supposed to do. That was a false flag motion. Just like how they made up the story about being under attack in Gaza. That was a false story. That was all a scenario played up. Again, so that people watching this don't pay attention and they think it's legitimate to do endless warfare. These are propagandists. And Jeffrey Sachs, being someone who historically understands why this is happening, is going to tell you the straight answer. This is the guy with the words of wisdom about the war in Syria.
Of narrative. Why did the U.S. invade Iraq in 2003? Well, first of all, it was completely phony pretenses. It wasn't, we were so wrong, they didn't have weapons of mass destruction. They actually did focus groups in the fall of 2002 to find out what would sell that war to the American people. Abe Schultzke, if you want to know the name of the PR genius. They did focus groups on the war. They wanted the war all the time. They had to figure out how to sell the war to the American people.
And that's exactly what the news media does. They're there to advertise the war. All the coverage that you're seeing about how awful, Putin is and how awful Bashar al-Assad is, or Saddam Hussein, or Osama bin Laden, all the news reports are there to sell you war. They want to sell you the idea that war is good. And they have to have advertising and marketing campaigns to showcase that to you. Just like how they did with the weapons of mass destruction that decimated Iraq, that decimated Afghanistan, and not telling you the true intentions. I thought we were over there to take down Osama bin Laden, but we still stayed there after that, years later. Why exactly is that? No one can tell you exactly why we were there for, but all I know is that after we supposedly left, we left billions of dollars in weaponry by accident. According to the U.S. State Department, it was by accident. We left hundreds of thousands and billions of dollars worth of weapon and ammunition to a bunch of supposed terrorists. And why would we do that? So that we have an excuse to go back. Because now we just armed further the Taliban. The same organization that back when it was the Mujahideen, we created these terrorist groups to operate in these countries, so we have the excuse to go into there. Because in order for people to sell the war on terror, they have to first create the terror, which is why they had the false flag incidences, why they had to put pressure after 9/11 to say we're going to combat those traitors. But you're not allowed to know any information on why we're doing this warfare. And anyone that's skeptical or asks these critical questions is deemed a Putin apologist. You're a terrorist sympathizer. Just like we're seeing now with Ukraine and Russia, just like we're seeing now with Israel and Gaza, anyone that asks questions or is skeptical or curious about why we're still over there, why we're putting thousands upon thousands, billions of dollars investment into this bloodshed warfare that is causing havoc to the entire globe, we're not allowed to question it. And it's because it diminishes the whole intention of the military-industrial complex, something we were warned about in the 60s, that has now become too big to fail, as they would say about big banks. The military-industrial complex has become so overbranching, so overreaching across the globe. We have over 1,000 military bases, American military bases around the world. It has become so big for its britches that's physically impossible to take down at this point. And we're not allowed to ask questions because they also control censorship. They also control the narrative. They control the media.
scare the shit out of the American people. It was a phony war. Where did that war come from? You know what? It's quite surprising. That war came from Netanyahu, actually. You know that? It's weird. And the way it is that Netanyahu had from 1995 onward the theory that the only way we're going to get rid of Hamas and Hezbollah is by toppling the governments that support them. That's Iraq, Syria, and Iran. And the guy's nothing if not obsessive. And he's still trying to get us to fight Iran this day, this week. He's a deep, dark son of a bitch, sorry to tell you, because he's gotten us into endless wars, and because of the power of all of this in the U.S. politics, he's gotten his way. But that war was totally phony. So what is this democracy versus dictatorship? Come on, these are not even sensible terms.
So, just like you said there, and it's amazing when you look at the comparison between Israel and America, isn't it funny that they both had the same enemies? It's almost like one country has these enemies or has these intentions to take over parts of the Middle East and tells the other to be complacent to that. Almost like they're putting pressure, almost like they're blackmailing said allied nations to be enemies with these other nations because it's the intentions of the greater Israel project. Oh, did I reveal too much? And if you look at the history of Netanyahu's partnership with the United States, when he used to come to Congress and he used to express the idea of his intentions of why we need to go in Iraq, why we need to go into Syria, why we need to go into Libya, why we need to go into have a warfare with Iran, which is what they're intentioning right now. It's all part of this agenda. It's all part of this exploitive agenda. And that's where October 7th, people are now realizing, people are now opening up to the idea that maybe that whole reason they had that music festival right next to the gates of Gaza, right next to where they knew it was unsafe, was done intentionally. Is done intentionally as a false flag initiative to advance warfare, so they had an excuse to sell the idea of going into Gaza and blowing it to smithereens. And sadly, it is working. Sadly, it is working. We already know that the Zionists are already involved in it because that's part of their prophecy. Their prophecy is to decimate over that territory, take back their homeland. And, you know, for the Christian Zionists, it's the Jesus bait. Oh, the Lord and Savior is going to come back if we decimate a bunch of people, which I asked them, what was the last time Jesus did a genocide? Because I don't remember that ever being in Scripture. But they do that intentionally to, again, sell you the idea of warfare. So here's Jeffrey Sachs again, this time on Judging Freedom by... I forget his name. Nepotamio? Anyway, Judging Freedom. Here he is again, discussing about why we sell warfare to people in the United States, to people in Canada. We have become victims of our own propaganda to constantly sell you warfare, to go slaughter these countries and extract their resources and exploit the entire planet. With no intention of humanity, no intention of democracy, no intention of anything that they spew in front of you, because again, they're trying to sell you and manipulate you that all this warfare, all this spending of bloodshed and tyranny is somehow good and beneficial when it's not. Listen to this.
I think history will record that Netanyahu has been one of the most destructive people in modern history, one of the most reckless, one of the most shameless and cynical, one of the most murderous. And I think history will record that the United States has done his bidding. It is becoming more and more clear as more and more analysts look back on the events of the last 24 years that the war in Iraq was at Netanyahu's bidding. The war in Syria, which unfortunately most Americans don't understand, but was a CIA operation to overthrow the Syrian government, was at Netanyahu's bidding. The U.S. has basically followed Netanyahu's lead for these 30 years. Netanyahu's idea, from his perspective, is that to make Israel safe, since Israel faces threats from Hamas or Hezbollah or others, that the only way to make Israel safe is not defeating those particular belligerent forces, but defeating the countries that back those forces. So Netanyahu's idea is that he, by manipulating the United States, will make the Middle East safe for Israel. This is such a wild and crazy and reckless idea that you couldn't believe that anyone would take it seriously.
And Netanyahu, who's constantly stating that, saying it's making it safe for Israel, it's making it safe for the Jewish population, that's anti-Semitic to point any of this out. Again, it's all intentional to sell you the idea of warfare. That, oh, we have to do this because otherwise there's going to be a genocide of Jewish people. We got to make it safe for the Jewish community. But let me tell you something. You are less safe as a Jew in Israel than you are in any part of the world. Because right now, police officers, Israeli police officers, are going and attacking Jewish people in Israel. They're calling this out. They're negotiating for peace, that want a ceasefire deal. They're going after Jewish people, who are the Zionists. The Zionists that have purposely cultivated themselves as being Jewish to undermine their heinous behavior and make them seem protected as a class, as a race, as a demographic, because anyone that goes after Zionism somehow is connected to Judaism. It's not. Actually, it's offensive and anti-Semitic as a Zionist to conflate them to being Judaism, because Jewish people don't agree with this warfare. They don't agree with this. But the Zionists do. The Zionists that's cultivated with the CIA, with the MI6, with the Mossad, with the British monarchy. They have all done this intentionally for the greater Israeli project, done it as a prophecy, as a religious prophecy, to sell you this political cult. And that is what this is. It's a political cult. It's a geopolitical cult done by Netanyahu, who's not even a real Middle Easterner. He's from Poland. He has a stage name. He changed his name purposely to, again, sell you the idea that he is a Middle Eastern guy, that he cares about Israel. He doesn't. Because even the people in Israel, the Israelis, were protesting against this guy before October 7th. So they knew it was coming. They knew that this warfare was happening. And yet, people are still convinced. People are still convinced that we have to decimate people's speech and criticism of this unjust law, on this unjust warfare, of this genocide, and saying that it's hurting the Jewish population. Those are the people that are sucked into this propaganda when they know verbatim that Netanyahu is a warlord, Netanyahu is a war thug, just like many people in the United States. That's why they have such a great allyship, to purposely intend to do unjust warfare on the Middle East to gain control and power as part of their prophecy, as part of their greater Israeli project, to storm in and take land, to take resources, to become this powerhouse, to become the military, to be the military carrier for the United States empire. That's the only reason, the only intention of why we care so much about this war. Because it's not about the Jewish population. It's not about saving lives. We're decimating many lives across the nation. It has nothing to do with Hamas, nothing to do with October 7th. Many people still don't know that Hamas originated from Israel. Hamas was paid off by Netanyahu himself. Why? So they can have a terrorist group decimating the Palestinians to take control of that territory. Because the Palestinians had a liberation movement that was squashed by Hamas. And now they're trying to fight Hamas to take the hostages in this false flag situation that people in Israel, people in Gaza, and people around the world kind of knew it was coming. And purposely for this notion, because Netanyahu is a war thug. He wants to advance warfare. He wants to advance warfare into Syria. He wants to advance warfare. He wants to take over Gaza. He wants to advance warfare in Iraq. He wants to do warfare with Iran. He wants to go into Jordan. He wants to go all of these places. And people have been suckered into this because they've been bought by the manufactured marketing that this warfare, this genocide, the killing and slaughter of innocent civilians, mostly mothers and young children, considers it a great asset because we're saving lives. We're saving the Jewish population from the heinous Arab nations that have not ever once attacked us. Palestinians have not ever once attacked us. You know what's done? It did attack us? Israel's. People in Israel, Mossad agents. They have purposely attacked us for this reason. Let's see the rest.
Except the United States has. We have gone to war repeatedly for no reason of American security, but for reason of Netanyahu's interpretation of Israel's security. This is unbelievable.
And Netanyahu's a madman. And I repeat that. To me, he's a madman. I met him years ago. I interviewed him when he was out of office. And I thought he was a madman then. And I think he's gotten worse and worse and worse. He's truly insane. I've never seen such a slaughter.
So that was Oliver Stone even coming forward with this, saying that he's a madman because he interviewed him. He was a filmmaker and interviewed this guy, and he could see this guy was a madman. This is a brutal dictator. This is a warlord that's even throwing his own country under the bus. And right now, the Israeli economy is crumbling. Right now, Israelis are fleeing this country. Not a lot of people want to stay in this aggressive territory that not only is attacking innocent lives elsewhere, but is also attacking their own. Right now, we're seeing IDF soldiers and Israeli police officers cracking down on Jewish rabbis, calling for peace, calling for diplomacy between the Palestinian nations and Israel, between Israel and other nations, calling for a ceasefire, calling for the end of the bloodshed. They're being cracked down and brutalized by Netanyahu and his law enforcement. On top of the crumbling of the Israeli economy, on top of the crumbling of their nation's sovereignty, many Israelis are fleeing. So this guy is obviously a madman. This guy is obviously just a sinister psychopath that no longer cares for the intention of his own sovereignty and the security of his people. There's no intention for the hostages. There's no intention on saving people from Hamas. That has gone out the window. Now he's just doing full blow-on warfare to cultivate as much territory as possible, like any other brutalizing warlord dictator. And it's amazing that people still to this day will come up to me and say, well, he's doing this to protect the Jewish population because otherwise the Arab nation will create a Holocaust, just like they did in World War II. Well, isn't it amazing that Netanyahu is also trying to conquer nations like a certain Adolf Hitler? Isn't it kind of amazing that they're brutalizing Arab people when they know verbatim that the Arab nations had nothing to do with the Holocaust? That was the German population. That was the Nazis. And now isn't it interesting that those Nazi factions are now incorporated to something masquerade as Jewish Zionism? And now we're seeing it played out in the decimation of the Middle East, which is something that both the United States and Israel and its allies all cultivate and want to do because they all have been blackmailed, part of the CIA Mossad operation, to advance this outrageous warfare on countries and waste and cause pillage to innocent lives in these territories.